two trains on the same western grade. Same tonnage, same destination, same brutal climb. One is led by a brand new Wabtec locomotive, the other by a unit stripped to its bare frame and rebuilt at roughly a third of the cost. A new machine carrying an old birth certificate. Both railroads buy from the same two builders. Both face the same emissions rules, the same customers, the same terrain. Yet Union Pacific and BNSF arrived at completely opposite answers to the same problem. Most people assume this is an engineering story. It's not. It's a story about who owns each railroad and how far into the future each is willing to bet. Union Pacific and BNSF share thousands of miles of overlapping track, running side by side across the vast expanses of the American West. They battle the same steep mountain grades, Cajon, Stevens, and Sherman, and pull the exact same heavy commodities. From agricultural products in the Great Plains to imported containers arriving at West Coast ports, their cargo profiles and transit times are virtually indistinguishable. Both networks operate within the same regulatory era, facing identical federal safety mandates, labor environments, and Environmental Protection Agency rules. Even their options for buying equipment are identical, limited to the same tiny pool of North American locomotive builders. They negotiate with the same sales representatives, review the same product catalogs, and buy from the exact same manufacturing facilities. In any other capital-intensive industry, such tightly matched operating conditions would naturally narrow choices. Competitors facing the same economic pressures usually converge on the exact same tools to maximize efficiency. Yet, for the past 15 years, their procurement strategies have moved in completely opposite directions. This divergence has persisted through multiple economic cycles and leadership changes. It is a sustained institutional choice. While one railroad consistently orders brand new, standardized units straight from the factory, the other has systematically bypassed the new build market, preferring to strip older locomotives to their bare steel and remanufacture them. The resulting split runs far deeper than simple styling, cosmetic preferences, or horsepower specs. It represents two entirely different philosophies on how to manage billions of dollars in heavy machinery. Both companies look at the same Western terrain and try to solve the exact same physics problems. The true explanation for their division lies far from the locomotive frame, hidden deep within the financial architecture of the corporations themselves. This industrial divergence is shaped by a marketplace of absolute scarcity. Before a single railroad executive decides how to allocate capital, they must face a stark reality. The heavy-haul locomotive market in North America has shrunk to just two viable manufacturers. Every Class I railroad is choosing from a remarkably small shelf, negotiating with the same two entities for the massive diesel-electric machines that pull their multi-million-dollar cargo. The duopoly defines the limits of innovation and availability before any railroad-specific strategic incentives ever enter the equation. The first option is electromotive diesel, better known as EMD. Once a dominant force under General Motors, the company underwent a series of ownership shifts before Progress Rail, a wholly owned subsidiary of Caterpillar, acquired it in 2010 for $820 million in cash. This acquisition integrated EMD's historic engineering legacy with Caterpillar's global supply chain and industrial footprint. The second option is the legacy locomotive division of General Electric. For decades, GE Transportation ruled the tracks with its highly successful Evolution series. That division underwent its own massive change in February 2019, merging with Wabtec in an $11.1 billion transaction that consolidated GE's locomotive expertise with Wabtec's extensive rail equipment portfolio and digital technologies. This leaves railroads with a classic duopoly: Progress Rail's EMD and Wabtec's GE. This highly consolidated supply chain means that any technological advantage, price point, or manufacturing delay at either builder instantly ripples across the entire transportation sector. Every major railroad operates within these exact boundaries. They review the same product catalogs, evaluate the same engine designs, and face the exact same technical limitations. Yet, despite sharing this identical two-supplier landscape, Union Pacific and BNSF have constructed completely different fleets. This divergence demonstrates that the ultimate driver of their decision-making lies in how each railroad values its capital assets over time. To understand the depth of this split, we must first look at the sheer scale of these two empires. Union Pacific and BNSF are not distant competitors operating in isolated markets. They are direct mirror images of one another, running side by side across the American West. Union Pacific manages a network of 32,200 miles with a fleet of approximately 8,300 locomotives. BNSF operates across a nearly identical footprint of 32,500 miles, relying on a fleet of roughly 6,780 locomotives. This is as close to a perfect peer-to-peer comparison as exists in modern global transportation. Their tracks run parallel through the exact same mountain passes and across the same arid plains. In the Powder River Basin of Wyoming, both carriers haul massive coal trains over the shared tracks of the Joint Line and up the grueling grades of Logan Hill. Along the southern corridors, BNSF's Southern Transcon and Union Pacific's Sunset Route serve as the primary pipelines for containerized imports moving from Southern California ports to Midwestern rail hubs. Both systems face the exact same physical constraints. They battle the same winter blizzards, climb the same steep grades, and pull heavy freight trains that stretch thousands of feet in length. Because they operate in the same environments under the same federal safety mandates and Environmental Protection Agency regulations, any traditional engineering model would suggest their equipment choices should eventually converge. Yet, despite sharing the same territory, the same operating challenges, and the same two suppliers, their fleets have split down the middle. This physical divergence reveals that two companies facing the same operational equations have calculated completely opposite answers, setting up a paradox where the tools they use to run their businesses tell two entirely different financial stories. The registered equipment under each railroad's reporting marks provides the first physical proof of this divide. The numbers reveal two entirely divergent paths. BNSF chose a strategy of aggressive uniformity. Its roster of over 6,700 locomotives is heavily weighted toward General Electric and Wabtec platforms, specifically the Evolution series. BNSF systematically built its mainline operations around models like the ES44AC, the ES44C4, and the ET44AC. For BNSF, the ideal locomotive is a standardized 6-axle machine supplied almost exclusively by one builder. This massive commitment to a single platform means that on any given day, nearly every heavy freight train on BNSF's Southern Transcon is pulled by visually identical, General Electric-designed motive power. Across the valley, Union Pacific's roster of 8,300 active and stored units tells a far more complicated story. Union Pacific maintained a highly diverse, mixed fleet, serving as the last major stronghold for electromotive diesel, or EMD. While BNSF phased out or minimized its reliance on EMD, Union Pacific kept thousands of EMD SD70 ACE units in active service alongside its General Electric counterparts. But the true split is found in how each railroad handles older assets. Instead of purchasing new standardized locomotives, Union Pacific launched a massive systemic modernization program. They stripped down legacy General Electric -9s and older EMD units, transforming them into rebuilt classes like the C44 ACM, the SD40N, and the GP40-3. This is not a slight variation in purchasing orders. It is a fundamental split in corporate identity. One railroad runs a modern, highly standardized fleet dominated by a single manufacturer. The other manages a sprawling, diverse roster of mixed heritages, keeping decades-old platforms alive through extensive remanufacturing. The physical evidence on the rails proves that these two competitors are no longer playing the same game. On January 1, 2015, the environmental playing field for North American railroads changed forever. The Environmental Protection Agency's Tier 4 emission standard went into effect, demanding a massive 76% reduction in nitrogen oxides and an 85% drop in particulate matter compared to older engines. This was not a minor regulation that engineers could satisfy with a simple engine tweak or a software update. It was a strict legal mandate that required a clean sheet redesign of how a locomotive processes fuel and handles exhaust. The two remaining locomotive builders took completely different paths to meet this standard, turning a technical challenge into a major strategic fork for their customers. General Electric was first to market, delivering its new ET44AC locomotive to BNSF in July 2015. GE's engineering team met the stringent Tier 4 rules by redesigning their 4-stroke GEVO engine, using advanced exhaust gas recirculation and twin turbochargers. They achieved these ultra-low emissions without requiring selective catalytic reduction or urea-based aftertreatment fluids, which railroads desperately wanted to avoid due to the logistics of refilling extra tanks. BNSF embraced this platform early, buying hundreds of units and establishing strong field confidence as the locomotives logged millions of miles. Electromotive Diesel, under its parent Progress Rail, faced a much more difficult path. Their response, the SD70AC T4, arrived later and relied on a newly developed 4-stroke engine called the EMD 1010. But when these units finally entered service, they faced immediate, systemic reliability challenges. Early fleets suffered frequent engine shutdowns, computer failures, and airline faults, with availability rates hovering around 78%, well below the 90% industry standard for new equipment. This performance gap transformed the buying map. While GE's Evolution series went on to capture more than 80% of all Tier 4 locomotives in service, EMD's orders stalled as multiple railroads canceled deliveries and returned leased units. The 2015 deadline did not just change how engines were built, it forced a high-stakes choice. Every Class 1 carrier now had to decide, do they standardize on a single dominant manufacturer and accept their pricing, or do they find an entirely different way to keep their older, pre-regulation fleets running indefinitely? In 2018, Union Pacific made a quiet but monumental shift in its capital allocation strategy, halting all new orders for Tier 4 locomotives. Instead of purchasing expensive, newly designed engines straight from the factory, the railroad pivoted toward an aggressive, large-scale modernization program. They turned to their existing fleet, focusing on legacy platforms like the GE-9 and older EMD models, systematically transforming them into newly designated classes: the C44 ACM, the SD40N, and the GP40-3. This was not a routine maintenance schedule or a minor upgrade. It was a deliberate manufacturing strategy. Union Pacific began rolling legacy locomotives into heavy shop facilities and stripping them completely down to their bare steel frames. From that raw foundation, technicians rebuilt the machines from the ground up, installing upgraded digital control systems, positive train control technology, rewired electrical packages, and modernized air-conditioned cabs. The resulting machines left the shop as essentially brand new locomotives, but they carried old birth certificates. The genius of this strategy lies in the financial math and the regulatory framework. Under Environmental Protection Agency rules, if a railroad keeps its investment in a rebuilt locomotive below 50% of the vehicle's original value, the machine does not have to meet the strict Tier 1 emission standards. Instead, it only needs to comply with Tier 1 baselines. This regulatory threshold turned a technical compromise into a highly efficient capital decision. A brand new Tier 4 locomotive carries a price tag upward of $3 to $4 million. A complete remanufacturing job, by contrast, costs Union Pacific approximately $1.5 million per unit, roughly half to a third of the cost of a new build. For this fraction of the price, Union Pacific gets a locomotive with an 80% boost in reliability and a 14% increase in tractive effort, modernizing its fleet while preserving vital capital. The choice between buying a brand new $4 million locomotive and rebuilding an old one for half that price is not decided by mechanical engineers in the maintenance shops. It is decided by corporate ownership and the specific way each company calculates the time value of money. This corporate architecture is the true reason the fleets of Union Pacific and BNSF have diverged so sharply over the last 15 years, proving that financial incentives shape physical networks far more than horsepower or emissions technology. When Berkshire Hathaway acquired BNSF, it insulated the railroad from the constant pressure of public stock markets. Berkshire operates with what Warren Buffett calls patient capital. The parent company can absorb massive long-term investments, spending over $14 billion on property, plant, and equipment in the first 9 months of 2025 alone, with $10.7 billion directed specifically toward its railroad and energy businesses. Because BNSF has access to this abundant pool of low-cost capital, its internal discount rate is exceptionally low, estimated at around 5%. When BNSF engineers run a financial model on a new locomotive, they can comfortably project their returns over a 30-year horizon. At a 5% discount rate, the fuel savings, lower maintenance costs, and reliability gains in year 15, 20, and 25 still carry substantial value on the balance sheet today. This long-term horizon makes the high upfront capital intensity of brand new, standardized fleets highly profitable. BNSF can justify spending billions on new Tier 4 engines because they expect to reap the rewards of uniform fleet operations decades into the future, with Berkshire happy to wait for the return on investment. Across the parallel tracks, Union Pacific operates under a completely different set of financial rules. As a publicly traded company on the New York Stock Exchange, Union Pacific must answer to institutional investors who demand consistent, short-term performance. Every 90 days, the railroad must report its operating ratio, net income, and earnings per share to Wall Street analysts. In the second quarter of 2026, Union Pacific reported a 6% increase in net income and a 7% jump in earnings per share, satisfying the market's constant demand for growth. This structure forces management to maintain strict capital discipline, prioritizing dividend payments and multi-billion-dollar share buybacks to keep stock prices high. Because Union Pacific must compete for public capital, its weighted average cost of capital is much higher, sitting between 7.9 and 9.1%. This higher cost of capital changes the financial math entirely. When Union Pacific applies a 9% discount rate to a 30-year asset purchase, any cash savings generated 20 years from now are discounted so heavily that they virtually disappear from the net present value calculation. Under this public market discipline, the financial math heavily favors projects with quick, immediate returns. A $1.5 million rebuild that extends the life of an existing locomotive by 15 years delivers an immediate boost to capital efficiency, satisfying short-term return expectations while keeping cash free for shareholders. The exact same locomotive presents two entirely opposite investment profiles, depending on the corporate boardroom evaluating the numbers. In October 2018, Union Pacific launched its version of Precision Scheduled Railroading, an operating model named Unified Plan 2020. This systemic shift fundamentally restructured how the railroad used its massive asset base. Instead of dispatching frequent, shorter trains, The new operational logic prioritized consolidating freight into massive multi-mile consists. These longer trains meant the carrier could move the exact same volume of cargo while maintaining a significantly smaller active locomotive fleet. The immediate operational consequence was an unprecedented surplus of motive power. Union Pacific systematically pulled approximately 1,500 locomotives from active service. To house this sudden excess, the railroad established massive strategic reserves in the dry climates of the Southwest, most notably along a 3-mile stretch of desert track near Benson, Arizona. At its peak, this single storage facility held roughly 360 idle units. These desert storage yards are the physical evidence of this structural fleet surplus. They represent a deliberate business system effect rather than a simple operational curiosity. By keeping hundreds of older, depreciated locomotives preserved in the arid desert, Union Pacific can smooth its depreciation expenses, keeping the units on the balance sheet as capital assets rather than taking immediate write-offs. These stored engines are regularly inspected, providing an invaluable buffer of surge capacity that can be quickly reactivated when shipping demand spikes. This vast pool of idle power directly alters the procurement equation. When a railroad holds hundreds of functional, paid-off locomotives in reserve, the marginal case for buying brand-new $4 million Tier 4 units completely collapses. The immediate pressure to invest capital in new locomotives evaporates when the active roster is already lean and productive. For Union Pacific, the operational discipline of a smaller active fleet backed by a massive desert reserve made fresh factory orders financially indefensible. The physical shape of a railroad network is ultimately dictated by what rides inside the freight cars. On BNSF, the dominant force is the Southern Transcon. This double-tracked superhighway, stretching from Southern California to Chicago, handles more than 17 million intermodal loads annually. Running priority intermodal Z trains over this corridor requires high-horsepower, fast-accelerating locomotives capable of maintaining an average speed of 37 miles per hour, about 17% faster than the Class 1 average. For BNSF, this service pattern rewards extreme consistency. A train carrying premium consumer electronics or time-sensitive retail goods requires maximum reliability to protect tight delivery schedules. This operational demand makes a standardized, single-builder fleet of high-horsepower GE and Wabtec machines a natural fit, allowing locomotives to cycle between identical runs with minimal maintenance variance. Union Pacific operates a network with a vastly different cargo profile. While intermodal traffic remains a major business line, Union Pacific carries a far larger and more diverse volume of traditional manifest and chemical traffic, particularly out of the industrial hubs of the Gulf Coast. On its Sunset route, Union Pacific runs massive manifest trains that can stretch up to 20,000 feet in length, significantly longer than BNSF's typical 16,800-foot intermodal runs. These trains haul dense, heavy commodities like liquid chemicals, plastics, and agricultural products. This traffic mix demands raw pulling power and high tractive effort. Moving these heavy, slow-rolling consists requires multiple locomotives distributed throughout the train to manage coupler tension and steep grades. A highly diverse fleet composed of both newer high-horsepower units and rebuilt legacy locomotives is perfectly suited for this work. Slower bulk trains have a much higher tolerance for roster variety, allowing Union Pacific to utilize its older, rebuilt EMD and GE power where outright speed is secondary to sheer tractive effort. The nature of the freight itself shapes the ideal roster, aligning with the operational footprints of each carrier without replacing the underlying financial explanation. When a railroad standardizes its fleet, the efficiencies ripple far from the tracks and straight into the maintenance shops. For BNSF, committing to a single dominant locomotive family transforms the entire mechanics of railroad upkeep. Instead of managing a sprawling, mismatched catalog of components, the purchasing department stocks exactly one set of critical spare parts. Every shelf in every major facility holds the same traction motors, the same turbochargers, and the same digital control boards, keeping inventory costs low and reducing shipping delays for rare parts. This uniformity reshapes the labor force. Mechanics do not have to split their training between competing manufacturers, trying to master the distinct quirks of different software packages, electrical systems, or engine blocks. A technician in Kansas can move to a shop in Washington and work on the exact same engine layout, using the same diagnostic programs and the same wrench sets. Standardized procedures govern every scheduled inspection and heavy overhaul, minimizing the margin for error when hundreds of locomotives require rapid servicing to keep freight moving. This operational predictability is grounded in immense real-world scale. By aligning with Wabtec's Evolution series, BNSF did not gamble on a high-risk novelty. The platform arrived with the proven maturity of 1,178 deliveries and more than 500 million cumulative miles logged in active service. Every potential failure point had already been mapped, studied, and corrected across years of heavy haul operations. The shop network functions with the speed of a factory assembly line, where repairs are routine rather than diagnostic puzzles. Ultimately, standardization operates as a powerful asset in its own right, delivering system-wide simplicity to a complex, multi-state network where every locomotive behaves exactly like the next. While a rebuilt locomotive like a C44 ACM, SD40N, or GP40-3 costs Union Pacific approximately $1.5 million, about half the price of a brand new Tier 4 unit, this upfront discount carries an enduring operational trade-off. The immediate 30 to 40% savings in capital expenditure is achieved by reusing the original steel frame, engine block, and generator core. But beneath the fresh yellow paint and the modernized air-conditioned cab, the machine inherits its past. Shop crews and asset managers are the ones who must live with the daily reality of this compromise. Rebuilding a locomotive does not erase decades of heavy stress on the underlying steel frame, nor does it eliminate the microscopic corrosion inside legacy conduits. Older subsystems, including traction motor cables, air brake lines, and complex cooling manifolds, are often reconditioned and reinstalled rather than replaced. This is done to ensure the total modernization cost remains strictly below the EPA's 50% original value cap, which allows the unit to remain classified under looser Tier 1 emissions limits. Over time, these legacy components introduce unpredictable points of failure that do not exist on a brand new factory machine. This deferred cost eventually reappears on the railroad's daily reliability reports. While a newly manufactured locomotive can run for hundreds of thousands of miles with minimal mechanical intervention, a rebuilt fleet requires more frequent inspections, shorter service intervals, and a higher overall maintenance burden. The initial capital savings are slowly clawed back by the labor hours required to keep 30-year-old machinery running under heavy load. This reality frames Union Pacific's modernization program as a distinct, long-term bet. By choosing to rebuild rather than purchase new, the railroad accepts lower capital intensity today in exchange for a permanently higher maintenance workload tomorrow. It is a financial strategy that converts capital expenses into operating costs, betting that the flexibility of a paid-off, modernized fleet will outweigh the persistent, chronic issues of a machine with an old birth certificate. These diverging fleets prove that a locomotive is more than steel and horsepower. It is a physical manifestation of corporate philosophy. As the industry faces unprecedented pressure to decarbonize, Union Pacific's market-driven agility and BNSF's patient private capital horizon are running on two entirely different tracks. Their choices today will shape American supply chains for the next 40 years. Which strategy do you think will win out? Let us know in the comments.